Well, thanks for being here tonight, coming along.
Well, it's a great honour to be here, obviously, and I'm very aware of tonight being in the shadow of events in Manchester, and given what I have done and do, perhaps that's particularly relevant. And please don't be shy, I'm sure you won't be, about asking any questions you want to ask.
Great, okay. So perhaps for some of the audience members who haven't followed your career as much, I was wondering if you could give us an insight into what led you from being in the military, moving into the private sector. What initially drew you to that challenge and the fires that you ended up working on there?
Yes, I'd made a very conscious decision to turn down a job I was offered by General Sir Peter de la Billière when I was working for him immediately after the first Gulf War, when I was offered another job with the Special Air Service to go back with them. And I turned that down on the basis that I was going to become an oil and gas executive, joined Tony Buckingham in a company called Heritage Oil and Gas, and set out on this new career, even trying to read the odd textbook about oil and gas, to find myself 6 months later a general in the Angolan army at war. So that didn't work very well. And to directly answer the question, we were attacked. Heritage had a base in northern Angola, which was overrun by UNITA, the Angolan rebels who had just lost an election, judged free and fair by the United Nations, and they decided they would return to war, which was really a terrible crime given the fact that Angola had been almost constantly at war for 35 odd years. And so Tony and I really had no hesitation in thinking that perhaps the thing to do with them was to fight back.
Okay, great. So some, private military contractors are generally painted with not a very nice colour, and we actually had Eric Prince, as you know, who spoke here earlier this term. People in the private military industry say that they can provide solutions to some of the biggest issues we're facing today, if everything from ISIL to securing borders to countering piracy. Why do you think that these solutions can't be delivered through the military infrastructure that we have on a state level?
Well, I think the short answer to that is that they can be delivered. It's just that for one reason or another, either cost or political will, the political masters would rather it was done by private military contractors. And you mentioned, for example, the whole business of maritime security against the pirates around the Horn of Africa. And actually that was an extraordinary case because the shipping industry and Lloyd's resisted for months and months and months, resisted the putting of armed guards on the ships, which the security industry was telling them would pretty quickly solve the problem, which indeed it did. And the government response to that was to send warships into the area at vast expense, more the American government than the British, although the British did send some. And that was not a good response.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there can ever be the political will to engage private military contractors in these sorts of areas? Again, we've seen engagements in Iraq, for example, where were tainted as quite negative episodes. Do you think there's ever going to be a point where governments say, listen, we're going to reach some sort of consensus and actually engage, private military team to go in to, tackle ISIL, for example?
I mean, never say never. I remember an executive outcome sitting there and people saying, oh, executive outcomes, we could be the United Nations Fire Brigade force in Africa. And I used to say, no, forget it. We never, ever will never happen. And there were a lot of people who wanted to, if you like, make executive outcomes more respectable and more corporate. And I would just sort of say, no, it just won't happen. This is a one-off situation. We've done what we had to do. We've done it okay, but do not think this can be replicated, blah, blah, blah. It'll never happen, I said. And then bang, along came Iraq, and boy, it really did happen. So I think it's very, very hard to predict. And if you take that example, why did that happen? It happened because the Americans decided they wanted to reduce the number of uniformed boots on the ground. It was absolutely political decision.
Yeah. One issue which this highlights is uniformed soldiers obviously have the accountability to the nation whose flag they have on their uniform. Where does the accountability for private military contractors come from?
Well, that's highly contentious, and that is the nub of the problem. I mean, if you're wearing Her Majesty's uniform, then what you're doing is backed up by all the institutions and the law of this country. Whether it's right or wrong, you do have that mandate, if you like. Private military contractor does not necessarily do so, but, for example, the states have introduced legislation whereby an American private military contractor, wherever he is in the world, if he does something which would be illegal in the United States, he can be charged with that under US law. So they've got around the jurisdiction issue, if you see what I mean.
Okay, but do you still think there's not an issue? Obviously the political will and the accountability, the two come hand in hand. What more do you think the industry could do to address the issue of accountability if they wanted to get bigger engagements such as the ones we're talking about?
Yeah, you're talking now about the PMC industry, the sector, if you like. Well, if you look at Olive, which is now I think joined up with Triple Canopy, I mean they're Dubai based. They are the St George brothers, who are both ex-Irish Guards officers. They started it, and they have basically made it their business to make Olive the most sort of certificated ISO kite mark PMC in the world, and they've been very successful with that, and they've done a good job. But there is a big gap between a company like that, who may end up fighting because they get attacked, and a company like Executive Outcomes at the other end of the spectrum, who basically are saying to a government, pay us to fight your war. There's a big gap between those two things, and people sometimes call them both PMCs, which I think is a bit, can be misunderstood.
Yeah. On the flip side of the coin, the lack of accountability sometimes also means a lack of protection as you're going on for the people working as private military contractors. Do you think this deters people in the industry from attracting top talent who are currently serving, in uniform?
I think I can really only talk for the British Army in this case, and certainly you've got quite a distinction. I mean, there are quite a few people in the army at any one time, and again, I'm wildly out of date, but I don't imagine it's changed that much. You've got a certain type of person who is, quite keen on the idea of going out and being adventurous around the world, and if the British Army isn't supplying it, then they'll go and work for whoever is. Then there is the other sort of type of person and that sort of person tends to be heading towards the Special Air Service or the Parachute Regiment. And then the other kind of person who's sort of determined to be a general and is following everything by the rule book and is probably going to end up on the board of a major publicly quoted company. So it's sort of more or less a character thing than anything else.
Mm-hmm. We've spoken quite a lot about private military contractors in the sphere of combat operations. How do you think the industry is going to evolve in terms of actually supplying intelligence and working in the private intelligence sector? That's something that lots of the audience here are probably less aware of compared to actual privately staffed operations.
Yeah, I mean there are many commercial intelligence companies who drift into the realms of, if you like, PMCing in the intelligence world. You have control risks, you have hacklet. In terms of PMCs operating in the intelligence world directly as part of it, you have New Century, which is Tim Collins and Michael Grunberg, and they've been enormously successful for the Americans in Afghanistan, and I believe now in Mexico as well. So that is very much happening.
At the start of the event, you referenced the tragic terrorist incident in Manchester at the start of this week. Do you, as defence and security expert, feel that the UK's intelligence, policing, security community is geared up at the moment to safeguard this country?
It's massively geared up.
Right. Okay. So you have full confidence that they're sufficiently resourced and sufficiently experienced at the moment to handle this dynamic and constantly evolving threat?
I think it's being got as right as it can be got under the circumstances.
And do you think there's a role for the private sector in this response?
Well, I mean, I think you'll probably find that there are lots of people involved in the private sense. And this has always been the case. I mean, I think when the Hood went out to chase the Bismarck, there were shipyard workers on the Hood. And, they're employed by a company, that's a PMC. And so, I know Eric went into this in great length. He's a friend of mine, by the way. So, where do you draw the line? Because, yes, when a government does things, and you have the army and the police and the intelligence agencies, of course they're using private contractors along the way, all the time. I mean, the MOD have privately paid policemen. They're not soldiers on the gate. The people doing the computers may be a private company. People maintaining particular aircraft may be private, not Royal Air Force engineers. And so I think it gets very, there are very, very many shades, if you like. There is a whole spectrum of shades as to how non-military personnel are involved in military matters. If that probably doesn't answer your question, but
well, it's related to it.
But you can shoot again.
We were speaking earlier, and there was an interview that came out the last fortnight about some of your new challenges, and you've been turning to about some of the new challenges you're taking on, and your book actually, which is circulating around at the moment. What other adventures are you taking on now these days? What's your next big challenge?
I take on, as much as I can really, because I enjoy working, and so very, very varied. I mean, I've done some field production work for Vice. I took Vice into North Sudan with the rebels, and then they hired me to make actually with Eric. I involved Eric in the same thing, and we made one of those 20-minute Vice programs. Well, they wanted it to be a day in the life of a private military contractor. And I said, what, you mean some poor guy's got to stand outside an embassy in a really hot and horrible country? And they said, no, we don't mean that. We mean something exciting. So we then got into the realms of scripted reality, and very nearly all got arrested in Venezuela. So that was a risk too far. And then I did a security audit for the Somaliland government against a UK company who declared force majeure, absolutely incorrectly, and I think hoping that no one was going to bother to go to Somaliland and check. I mean, really, it was as bad as that. Now, I get involved in oil and gas and mining promotion in Africa mostly. And I'm also working on importing an American, we were talking about it upstairs, an American virtual reality training system for training, especially police, in armed situations. Very, very good system. So I'm working on that. Okay,
great. And kind of drawing it back now before we take a few questions from the audience. I suppose what you're most notorious for is the bungled operation in 2004. Looking back on that in retrospect now, you thought you were going in and you were going after this dictator who was a real tyrant in this country. Do you have any other kind of operational regrets about how you went into it? Obviously, you were let down by a number of the partners behind this operation, but in retrospect, is there something that you would have done differently?
No. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I made a mistake. I should have. We reached a certain point when I should have said, "Stop. This is too dangerous, and the risks are now too high." And I think the easiest way of looking at it, from a sort of as an analogy, would be if you were Himalayan mountaineering, and at what point does the leader say, the weather's too bad, there's too much sickness, so-and-so's injured, and the avalanche risk is too high. Now, the thing about Himalayan climbers is, obviously, they wouldn't be Himalayan climbers if they were the kind of people who turn around easily. But there is still a point at which you expect that leader to say, okay guys, I'm going to get a lot of shit for this, but we're calling it off. And that is where I failed. I should have said, stop, and I didn't.
Okay, great. Well, on that note, I've got a few questions for later, but let's take a few offerings from the audience. So if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and if you're selected, wait for the microphone to reach you. The microphone is recording but will not amplify you, so don't be perturbed by that.
And I am deaf.
So shout, project. Okay, great. Yeah, let's go to the hand at the end of the row there.
Other than the Equatorial Guinea situation, what's the most dangerous thing you've done?
That you're allowed to talk about.
I don't know. I think I've been pretty stupid on a couple of occasions in the mountains, hiking. But definitely the scariest moment was in a Angolan Air Force Sukhoi twin-seat aircraft, which did a low-level photo recce of Soyo, which included a bombing and strafing run of UNITA and a lot of anti-aircraft fire. And I didn't know how to use the ejector seat, and I very much doubt if it had worked, even if I had. And I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt thinking, what am I doing here? This has got to be a bad idea. But anyway, I got away with it, luckily.
Great. Let's have another question. Yeah, over there in the striped t-shirt.
Good evening, and thank you for your time. Could I please ask for some of your insight into leadership and rank structure within PMCs compared to your time in conventional forces? And could I please ask also for some comment on whether the concept of, in conventional forces, the junior officer rank are the days numbered for a 19-year-old lieutenant or a 23-year-old captain, and will we do away with the division of class?
Okay. I think I'll answer the last bit straight away. You've got to have those guys there, because that's how you're going to educate them, and that's how they're going to get their experience. And certainly the British Army system has worked for such a long time and has worked so well, I wouldn't try and change it. When people ask me about different types of leadership in the different units I've served in, I sort of joke about it and I say, well, basically, if you join the Scots Guards as a young officer, you are innocent until proven guilty. You join as the parachute regiment and you are guilty until proven innocent. And then you join the Special Air Service and you are just straight guilty as an officer. The business about discipline and command and leadership in a PMC is extremely difficult because obviously you no longer have Her Majesty's Queen's regulations on your desk, and you can't operate in the way that you're used to doing. In executive outcomes, and it's an interesting point here actually, if I can just bring it up quickly, the executive outcome story, when it kicked off in February '93, you couldn't do that today. The reason you could do it then was because the South Africans were coming out of minority white rule. They had got an incredibly experienced and battle-hardened military, which were absolutely dying to be recruited by people like us. And this was a unique moment because basically they were having their pensions torn up by the ANC, the incoming government, not surprisingly, I may say. And so they were really pissed off and looking for new work, and they were very, very, very good indeed. You wouldn't be able to do that today, I don't think anywhere really. But what we did with those guys was they actually signed, on their contract, when they signed up, they agreed that they were fully aware and compliant with the fact that executive outcomes would operate with all the discipline, the rules, the tradition and culture of the South African Defence Force. So basically, if a corporal told you to get your hair cut, you got your hair cut. And executive outcomes could afford to do that because we were always massively oversubscribed. I mean, we had 3,000 people on the books that never got in. There were 2,000 in, another 3,000 wanting to get in. So we could be very strict with how we enforced that. But at the end of the day, if you're in a firefight, the basic military disciplines are not there. The guy can turn around and say, I'm not doing this anymore, sorry, put his weapon down and walk away. And we did have incidents of that in Angola. And we just said, fine, we don't want you here then, bugger off. And that, at one point, 20 of them went when we could ill afford to lose those 20 guys. But it was better to get rid of them than to have them around messing up the morale of the people who wanted to stay.
But do episodes like that not concern you about a private military contractor's ability to deploy operationally and deliver an entire engagement through? If they can just down tools and say, stuff your pay packet, I'm going home.
Absolutely, yes. And now I am, just so I can put it on the table here, I am not someone who thinks that the solution to all military problems is the PMC. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not. And I also think that it's an admission of failure in a way if that is what people think. But there is a further point to that which I think is really important and which is not emphasised. And that is that if you're operating at the really sharp end of the PMC world, which executive outcome certainly was, then you are a parasite to the actual green machine. In the same way, the SAS or special boat sections or whatever cannot exist without the big green army. First of all, it needs the big green army because operationally you have to have a structure in which to do things. You have to have cover for going to places, and you need the logistics and everything else. But also, the Special Air Service and the SBS obviously depend upon the regular army from which they will recruit. So where do your top line, your first tier PMC people come from if everyone's PMC? And the taxpayer, if you're the sort of taxpayer and you're saying, well, wait a minute, I'm spending a fortune on having this bloody army, and I'm spending even more money on having this special forces bit. And now the PMCs come along, hire the best guys, and then sell them back to me. Wait a minute, something wrong. So I think that raises very interesting issues about how this should and shouldn't work. I actually have a solution to it, which is basically what you should do is you should say, right, all PMCs must be part of the TA. Okay. Because then, if people go on a PMC job and suddenly it's beginning to look a bit out of hand or not quite right, you say, okay guys, we're calling you up now. You're all in the TA anyway. Right. Put your berries on. Here you are. I'm not sure that's going to go down very well with some of my peers. But.
Great. Let's have another question. Yeah, at the back there, the waving hand.
Hi, Simon. Thanks for coming and speaking to us. If we can rewind maybe 3 questions and get back to the juicy stuff. I remember reading a book, I think, not yours, that said that the failure of your endeavour in Equatorial Guinea was down to various factors, delays, and it was quite openly spoken about in various bars in South Africa. So I was wondering if you could just expand, if you could move beyond the Himalayan mountaineer metaphor and talk about a little bit about what went wrong. And sure. What advice would you give to an aspiring young mercenary these days that wanted to do something similar?
Yeah, no, sure. Well, firstly, you've got to find a really good oil and gas company to work for. To go back to the Equatorial Guinea cock-up, the big sin that we committed was and this is good advice for your young mercenary. From the moment of saying we're going to do this to the moment of trying to do it should be as short as you can possibly make it, because that's the danger zone. I'm not talking about operational surprise. I'm not talking about the speed of execution of the operation itself. I'm talking about the time from when somebody says, right, we're going to knock off the president of Equatorial Guinea and take over the country, to when we get into the aeroplane and do it. Now, in our case, that was a year. And I warned the people backing the operation at the beginning. I said, don't do that. Or don't do it, we've got to be quick. And I told them, and they didn't listen. And I told them that when we did Angola, when we went into Angola with executive outcomes, and then when we went into Sierra Leone subsequently, we did it very, very, very quickly, because there are always leaks. It doesn't matter how good your security is, there will be leaks. So the only way to counter that is to be quick enough that you get inside the decision-making and acting loop of the people who want to stop you. So it's that speed of execution. Now, an awful lot of people did know. By the time we went, a lot of people knew, and I knew that they knew. And the South African government was a tacit fellow traveller, if you like. Mbeki was in favour of the attempt up until 2 hours before the order was given for our arrest. And Spanish intelligence were also 100% on side. Various other intelligence agencies were also aware of what was going on. And basically the signals that I was getting, and actually I'm a pilot, and I was looking at the instrument panel hoping to see a red light, because it was getting very scary and it was going very wrong. And I thought, well, if I see a really good red light here, I can say, oh, okay, sorry, we've got to stop. But there was no red light. And what we were getting instead was indications and messages from South African intelligence especially, which was go. If you're going to do it, go now. And we went.
And the rest is history.
I'm going to be really cheeky and get a couple more in, if I may, because I've got so many questions. I heard one anecdote, I'm not sure if it was you or one of your colleagues. You're in a jail in Equatorial Guinea and you try to get hold of Mark Thatcher on the phone, and he was at the Monaco Grand Prix. Was that you?
No, that wasn't me.
Or was it, maybe it's not a true story?
No, I think there was a story about that.
So that's one of the questions, and the second one is, you said you needed a big splodge of wonga to get out of the jail.
Yes.
Who stumped it up in the end? Because you came out quite quickly.
No, I came out of Equatorial Guinea. I did not want to go to Equatorial Guinea. Friends and foe alike had told me. In fact, the president publicly said that if I ever was in Equatorial Guinea, he would drag my naked corpse through the streets of the capital, having first eaten my testicles. Which, here we are in Oxford, so it has a sort of classical ring to it, doesn't it? And I thought that when I got there, when I stepped down the plane, I stepped off the steps of the plane, arriving in Malibu, I was in handcuffs and leg irons. And I thought, well, they're going to wait until my foot steps on the ground, and then someone's just going to walk up to me and go, boof. That is what I thought was going to happen. But then it turned out that their enemies, the people they were after, the people they were really after, because they knew that there was going to be a palace coup. You know, you can't just rock up, not even someone like Equatorial Guinea, you can't just rock up with 60 people and expect to knock off the whole country. There was going to be a palace coup, and we were going to arrive shortly afterwards. The president would have been arrested by then, and the new president, the interim president, Severo Moto, was flying in on another aircraft half an hour behind me, and we were really there as his escort to make sure that he was safe and that the correct procedures for the election and everything went ahead. That was what was really going to happen. Where were we? I can't remember the question.
Who paid for you to get out of jail, and story about Mark Thatcher?
Yeah, no. So in the end, and there's quite a lot of things that I don't know about that whole operation today. I still don't know. And one of them is exactly why I was released. But I did do a lot for them in the course of my interrogation. I really worked hard with them. We at the beginning, they said, look, your enemies, being the people who had backed me, Mark Thatcher being one of those, have betrayed you, which they had while I was in prison. They are our enemies, and we can work together. So I said, oh, okay, well, in that case, we can have a deal. And in that case, I want a lawyer here, and I want a proper deal, and I want you to sign it. And they said, oh, no, man, we don't negotiate with terrorists. And I laughed. I was sitting there in handcuffs and leg irons, and I just laughed. And they sort of shook their head, and they said, why are you laughing? I said, well, because I was an intelligence officer and a soldier in Northern Ireland, and I know we always negotiate with terrorists. It's guaranteed. But anyway, so we then spent 3 months together, the interrogation went on for 3 months, and I did a lot for them, and you know that I think that's why I got my pardon. And in fact, I came out in November '09, and in I think March 2010, much to the dislike of my wife sitting there, I went back to Equatorial Guinea to see the president, to ostensibly to thank him for my pardon, but also to talk about other things. And he said, I want you to understand about your release. He said, first of all, in all my time as president, I've never known such a unanimous, I had rabbis who wanted to get you out, I had the Vatican trying to get you out, I had everyone trying to get you out. That's the first thing. The second thing is, by African standards, I could have kept you forever, very easily. And he said, and the third thing I want you to understand is that the person who had the most effect in getting you released was you. And that's all he said. And I don't know the answer to your question.
Given your sort of background in intelligence and black ops, surely you would have known that Western governments would have dropped you like a stone the moment you were rumbled. Why did you feel betrayed, and why did you go and work for the enemy? I mean, I'm not sure.
No, the sense of betrayal is that the guys in the operation with me, who were my brother officers, I'm not talking about investors in the back of the bus, I'm talking about Eli Khalil, Mark Thatcher, Gary Hersham, and a couple of others. These were my comrades in arms, if you like. These were my fellows on the operation, okay? And I'm not saying that they betrayed the operation. They may have done. If they did, I don't know. Why I say they betrayed me is because they did absolutely nothing to help me while I was in prison. Now, I don't know if you can imagine leading 69 mercenaries into a prison, most of whom are South African. They've all got wives and kids at home, and of course there is no welfare in South Africa. So the pressure on me to sort things out for them was absolutely immense. Now, those 4 people I named could have very easily managed to stump up $5,000 per family, which would have made all the difference to me, to my safety, to the whole situation we were in, which was dire. I mean, we thought we were going to be thrown on an aeroplane, taken to Equatorial Guinea and shot. And they didn't help. And that's where the betrayal comes in.
Thank you. I've probably spoken enough, so if anyone else wants to.
No, it's a good question.
So at no point did you enter into a formal agreement in return for your freedom that you were going to support the private prosecution that happened later on?
No, they all along they just said, look, you help us as best you can and we'll help you as best we can. Even to the point when they, after the interrogation, and like I said, I did help them as much as I could during the interrogation, I then got to the trial and they said, okay, now Mann, we want you to, you've cooperated in your interrogation, now we want you to cooperate on your trial. And I said, okay, well, what do you want me to do? And they said, well, we want you to plead guilty to attempted assassination of a head of state, attempted acts of international terrorism, and parking on a double yellow line in Knightsbridge. I said, you are kidding. You really are. And they said, no, that's what we want. And in the end, I just thought, at this stage, I've got really no choice. Because if I piss them off, I've got no chance. If we're working together, then maybe there's a chance. And then they gave me 32 years, which was a bit of a shock.
Not a great deal. Okay, do you have another question from the audience? Yeah, over here by the fireplace.
Thanks very much. We've heard about how these PMCs are free from high politics and political will of governments, but I'm interested about your own politics and morality and that of the people who do it. Like, is there room for your own personal politics and morality when you're a mercenary? Do you have to be a moral vacuum, or are there jobs which you would say, I'm not doing that because not because it's strategically impossible, but because you don't like what you would have to do?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I've really been involved in 3, arguably 4 full-on incidents, full-on situations. One was Angola, where we were attacked. 2 was Sierra Leone, where they were under terrible attack from the RUF, with awful things going on, and there was something in it for us. 3 was Papua New Guinea, where rebels had taken over Bougainville Island, were killing policemen, blah, 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 and the government of Papua New Guinea wanted the island back. And then 4thly, Equatorial Guinea. Now, in each one of those situations, as far as I was concerned, the moral, ethical aspects of the situation were okay. And I certainly would not have done things that were not okay, you know, and we did think about this, and we did talk about it at length. And, you know, it really goes back to sort of Mike Hoare and the guys in the Congo in the 60s who really did rape the nuns and rob the banks, you know, and they sort of gave the whole brand a very bad sort of image, I think. But you can be moral, and in fact, I remember on a number of occasions, we actually had a joke about it. We used to say, what kind of fucking mercenaries are we? Because we were behaving so well. And like in Sierra Leone, we hadn't been paid. And we said, well, there must be some money around here somewhere, you know, let's go. Because it was actually a case that we really couldn't go on paying for the operations we were paying for without money, you know, because we were running 2 helicopters, we had 100 men in the country, and I think it was costing about $200,000, $300,000 a month, which Tony Buckingham and I were paying ourselves out of money we'd made in Angola. And so, yeah, there was a bit of an issue there about, well, maybe we should just go and nick some money, or there must be something around here that's valuable.
Great. Thanks for that question. I think we've got...
I'm not trying to make light of a very serious question, no.
Great. I think we've got time for one more question from the audience. Yeah, let's go to the end of the row here.
The world you're describing is quite Anglo-American. There's been some reporting about rising tendencies of Chinese companies to want to use Chinese private military contractors. So do you think there's a change in the private military contracting world, and do you think that's significant, if there is one?
I think it's absolutely inevitable. I mean, we saw some Russian PMCs turn up in the Crimea, which were really bogus. And I mean, there is a point here, actually, we ought to just touch on, that a PMC, let's say you have a UK PMC, even if you're not a UK company, if you're an American company even, and you're operating in the UK, if you went and did something that the UK government did not like, you wouldn't be in business for very long. They will shut you down. They will come and shut you down. So, you know, you're not a free runner in the sense perhaps you'd like to be, or of like a pirate ship, you know, we can go and do what we like. You can't, because you're still in a world of, you know, electronic banking, tax man, etc., etc., etc. So you're not sort of free agents. It's very interesting, your question on the PMC side. So like on the maritime side, a lot of the maritime PMCs are now using, and some are actually PMCs from Sri Lanka, Malaysia, you know, they've got their own PMCs. And China, I happen to know, you know, they are very interested in this whole, because they've got such a massive investment in Africa, and they see American and especially British PMCs running around in Africa, and they're very often hiring them. And so they are thinking very hard about, well, can't we have those as being Chinese companies? At the moment, the answer is probably no, but they would like to change that. So yeah, it's bound to happen.
Great. Well, unfortunately, I think that's all we have time for in this session now. But thank you very much for coming along. It's a very engaging event and a bit different from some of the other speakers we put on. So thank you for coming and, you know, sharing your very varied career with us. It's a pleasure hosting you here today. Cheers. Thank you.